You might be thinking, well, God of War just isn't that kind of game anymore. It's not in that hack and slash or character action game genre now. But let's be real here, was the Devil May Cry inspired technical hack and slash ever really entirely its own genre? They're just action games with really good combat. Seems like we isolate them into their own kind of game so we don't have to hold every title with a sword to the same standard. When I was making my PS4 God of War review and analysing the combat, I immediately thought of a counter-argument I was likely going to get about my rather critical takes in some parts of the video. I thought people were probably going to comment, and they did, stuff like, "You can't critique the combat in this game because it's not the same genre as past God of War games anymore. It's not a hack and slash game or character action game. Don't compare the new God of War to that genre." Big quotes on the screen, please. Character action game is the nebulous, relatively new term that's cropped up over the years that even Wikipedia of all places still wants nothing to do with. Used to refer to action titles that emphasize complexity in their merely combat gameplay, where the depth of the brutal man-to-man fighting is a top priority, so the player can experiment and create all sorts of crazy moves and strategies. The best of these games elevating the mere act of play almost to performance art at the highest level. But this genre, I'm not sure it's real. It's kind of bullshit. First of all, I want to bring to your attention the stupid-ass name. Character action? What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. You play as a character and there's action? Yeah, way to narrow it down there, buddy. Or does the character in character action refer to the fact the playable characters in the game have, like, character? Like, personality? I don't know, again, not really a thing limited to games like Devil May Cry and Ninja Gaiden. Speaking of which, Ryu ain't exactly the most charismatic guy, so I think my big problem with character action as a genre, aside from the silly name I've always had a problem with, it doesn't matter, whatever, call it what you want, is that the requirements for induction are completely different to how most real genres work. Seems to be an exclusive club which you only get into based on merit, which I don't think is the case in other types of games, right? You have to be this complex to ride this genre, kid. You can hack and slash, but the complexity of the hack and slash has to meet some nebulous, inconsistent tally. And I mean, it's not like this complexity measurement is even that consistent either. I wouldn't say the new God of War is any less complex than something equally as shallow as, say, like, Killer is Dead, and is that not in the same genre as these other better games? I've seen people not even consider the original God of War titles to be character action games because they're not deep enough. It's all mad, it's crazy, I don't know. Super Mario and Dust Force have various levels of complexity, and I wouldn't say they're not both 2D platformers. A fighting game like JoJo All-Star Battle is way less complex than, say, Tekken, but they're still both fighting games, right? Uncharted and Vanquish are both third-person shooters, right? Vanquish's complexity doesn't make it part of the character third-person shooter action genre, does it? And it better not, because you all know as well as I do how much we all enjoy dunking on slow, clunky third-person shooters by comparing them to Vanquish. Is it the perspective that makes things different? God of War doesn't count as character action because the camera is locked behind the protagonist now? Well, as I mentioned in my God of War 4 video, God Hand has a camera a little bit like that, and I doubt anyone doesn't consider that part of this subset of character action games. What about that Hellblade game where you slash people the entire time? What genre is that? Character action, right? Surely. If a game has exploration and a big interconnected world, does that make it not a character action game? Well, titles like Ninja Gaiden, Devil May Cry 1, 3, and 4 still have fully interconnected worlds, and a lot of action games that don't still feature exploration and discovery to find extras and so forth. Does a game need to rank your performance to be character action? Oh yes, who could forget the timeless character action classic, Sonic Heroes. Okay, is it the RPG mechanics? There are more stats and status effects thrown in there now, so according to some people, it's not a hack and slash or character action game anymore. It's an action-adventure RPG instead. Ooh, what a crazy difference. Well, in my God of War 4 video, I do talk about how other hack and slashes have included buffs to attacks and their mechanics, and usually how unnecessary they are, but that's another point entirely. All action games have upgrades. Just because you tack on an overload of stats to slowly grind away at doesn't mean you've evolved into a different type of game, right? You're still hacking and slashing in a room of enemies for the whole thing. How does upping the strength of certain moves in God Hand differ wildly from the same thing in God of War, just because here it requires more busy work and micromanaging to do? And even if it did make it its own genre, why am I supposed to suddenly just be all like, well, I guess this additional set of systems they've added to God of War about giving some extra stats to my character in between fights somehow doesn't feel tacked on and unnecessary now because it's changed the genre of the game it's in. What? And apparently I'm also not allowed to critique the combat system because of this stuff. You see, even if we were to say, hey, old God of War is this genre and new God of War is that genre, why is it so offensive to use ideas and mechanics from other titles, no matter what family tree they come from, to improve systems in another game? Especially when the previous games in this franchise already had a bunch of common sense combat mechanics missing in the new God of War. Which, by the way, still includes a bunch of basic bitch mechanics that date back to Devil May Cry. So even if I cared about the distinction, I still don't see this as some kind of RPG. If every series with good combat decided to dumb itself down and add more RPG mechanics, would that suddenly be fine because it's not in the quote-unquote good combat genre anymore? Like, really? That's the get out of jail free card now. Why am I not allowed to discuss the combat in a game that's still mostly combat? A lot of people roll into town at this point and like to bring up stuff like, hey, you son of a bitch, you saying Dark Souls is worse because its combat ain't as complex as Devil May Cry's? Well, I guess I am, yes. If I talked about Dark Souls at this stage in its life, yeah, I probably would bring up that the core combat mechanics have gotten kinda stale. Demon Souls was this novel, tricksy game that focused on careful consideration of the environment in a brutal, unforgiving world. A lot of bosses were about tricksy tricks more than God of War, which is usually just, hack that shit. But it's not a hack and slash, don't say that though. Demon Souls, despite simple combat, was as a result novel for the time. Dark Souls then introduced this Metroidvania-esque world with no maps or waypoints that mixed up the formula. But I think it's safe to say that after that, things got a bit samey. And also, if we do play the genre card, Souls is way more of an RPG than new God of War. It has much more character customization, classes to pick from, story choices, covenants to join. It's not a 20-hour action game with a set character and linear series of events. There's a little more meat on the Dark Souls RPG bone. But yeah, I'd critique the combat in Dark Souls any day. The constant dodge rolling, the lack of parrying in most boss fights, which is supposed to be a major mechanic, and the finite amount of moves outside of strong and not so strong, etc, etc. Souls still gets plenty of points for not intercutting its raw gameplay with minutes upon minutes of obligatory walking and talking, but that's a whole other can of worms, so whatever. Even if the game is full on, no questions asked RPG to the core, am I allowed to bring up that I don't like the combat and it might suck ass? And depending on how prevalent it is, it may still ruin the experience? Because putting that to one side, I tell you now, the new God of War for PS4 doesn't have some gripping role-playing narrative to engage with outside of the 90% of the title that's hacking things. Also, just an aside, if you're one of those people who defend new God of War's combat as really deep, but also say I can't compare it to other hack and slash style games, then don't talk to me because those two things together... Ultimately, at the end of the day, when I critique something, I'm just coming at it from the angle of, hey, this is what I like and would like to see in the game. You can still enjoy it, but when people ask me to comment, you get my honest thoughts on what could have made things better. You can like any game over another, but dismissing criticisms of certain aspects because you've decided the games that do it better are in some kind of special cool kids club, which has no other defined characteristics other than really good combat, seems like a glib way to brush off complaints for no good reason. Why hold back what could be great? Give me a game where everything's top-notch, baby. I'm here, I'm waiting. Now please, don't make me make any more of these contentious fight me style videos. I need some positivity back on this channel again.